When my aunt passed away, I wasn't expecting anything to come of it. We weren't particularly close. She was the quiet one in the family, the distant relative who only showed up at weddings and funerals, always sitting in the back row with a somber expression and leaving early without saying much. So when the lawyer called and said she had left me her beach house, I was shocked. I didn't even know she owned a beach house. My mother had mentioned once that my aunt used to spend a lot of time by the coast, but no one really talked about her. There was something about her presence that made people uneasy, though no one could ever explain why. Just a gut feeling, I suppose. The kind of silence that doesn't come from shyness, but from holding too many stories you don't want to share. I drove out to Crescent Cove a week later, mostly out of curiosity. I wasn't sure if I would keep the place or sell it. Maybe I'd stay for a weekend, soak up the salt air, clear my head. When I arrived, the town was almost deserted. It wasn't tourist season, which made it even quieter. A single main street, with a few shops, a diner, and a general store. The locals gave me polite nods, but no one was particularly friendly. I mentioned the house my aunt's name. The air changed slightly. Faces turned away a little too quickly, smiles faded, just a little too fast. One old man sitting outside the tackle shop just shook his head and said, "That place should have been left to the sea." I didn't know what he meant until I saw it. The house stood near the edge of the shore, perched on a slightly raised stretch of land, like it was keeping its distance from the water, but couldn't help watching it. It was bigger than I expected, built in that old New England style with weather-beaten shingles, a wraparound porch, and paint that once might have been white but was now a pale grey. The windows stared out blankly toward the ocean, and the porch swing creaked gently in the wind, though I hadn't seen a breeze all morning. The air smelled thick with salt and something else faint, like damp wood or something left too long in the dark. Inside, the house felt suspended in time. Furniture covered in white sheets, dust thick on the floor, and that silence, the kind that presses against your ears. I walked through each room slowly, trying to imagine my aunt here, living in this space alone for who knows how many years. Her presence lingered in odd ways. A pair of old sandals still by the back door. A teacup, long, empty, resting on the windowsill. Drawers that stuck when I tried to open them, like they didn't want to be disturbed. In the living room, there were shelves filled with books about the ocean, local folklore, storm patterns, and a few handwritten journals with no names on them. One of them had a dried flower tucked between the pages and a small note in shaky handwriting that said, "The tide remembers." I climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, every step groaning under my weight. Upstairs, the bedrooms were simple, with faded floral wallpaper and lace curtains. The master bedroom faced the water, its window cracked open just enough to let the sound of the waves drift in. The bed was made perfectly untouched. In the corner stood an old dresser with a mirror covered by a black cloth. Something about that made me pause. I didn't remove it. The back of the house opened onto a path that led down to the beach. The sand there was damp and darker than I expected, and when I stood at the shoreline and looked back at the house, it appeared smaller, almost fragile. That night, I stayed in the guest room and listened to the ocean, expecting peace, but what I heard was a whisper carried in the wind, low and constant, like someone murmuring secrets through the cracks in the walls. The first night in the beach house should have been peaceful. I had unpacked only the essentials: clothes, toiletries, and a couple of books. I didn't bring much, figuring I wouldn't stay long. The air inside was cool despite the warm summer. Evening outside, and the sound of waves lapping the shore drifted through the slightly open window like a lullaby. But even as I settled into bed, there was a tightness in my chest, like something unseen was watching. I tried to brush it off as nerves. The first night in any unfamiliar place always felt strange, especially a house so old and full of silence. I kept a small lamp on the nightstand lit, just in case. At around 2 a.m., I woke up. I didn't know why. The kind of waking that doesn't come from a dream or a sound, but something else. A shift in the air. I lay still for a moment, trying to figure out what felt wrong. Then I heard 3 slow knocks. Not on the front door, not even on the bedroom door, but on the wall directly behind my headboard. Precise, evenly spaced, like someone knew exactly where I was sleeping. I sat up, heart pounding. The house was dark and quiet otherwise. I waited, expecting a second round of knocks, but it didn't come. I got up slowly and checked the hallway, then peeked out the window. Nothing. Just the empty beach bathed in moonlight. I convinced myself it was the wind or some old plumbing. Still, I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I found the hallway runner rug curled up at the ends, like someone had walked on it recently. I hadn't gone down that hallway since I arrived. I smoothed it back down with my foot and kept walking, trying to shake off the unease. In the kitchen, I noticed small damp footprints near the back door, child-sized bare feet imprinted on the worn wooden floor. I froze. I checked the locket was still bolted shut. The sand stuck to the print was wet, freshly tracked in. I wiped them up with a towel and said nothing, not even to myself. I didn't want to give the thought shape. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned pink and gold, casting long shadows across the dunes. It should have been beautiful. Instead, I felt eyes on me. I turned toward the dunes a few times, thinking I'd catch someone watching, but no one was there. That night, the knocking returned. Same place, 3 slow taps behind my bed. This time, I didn't check. I just pulled the covers tighter around me and stared at the ceiling. By the 3rd night, it wasn't just knocking. I heard footsteps in the hallway, soft and uneven, like someone dragging one foot. They'd stop right outside the bedroom door, then nothing. A few minutes later, the sound of furniture moving faintly downstairs, maybe the living room chair scraping across the floor. I listened, holding my breath, too afraid to move. When morning came, I found one of the dining room chairs turned to face the front door, as if waiting. The incidents continued, lights flickering for a few seconds, followed by the faint smell of seaweed and salt water, even when all windows were closed. One night I heard what sounded like humming, soft and tuneless, coming from the attic. The kind of humming a child might do while playing alone. I didn't dare go up there. My heart was constantly racing, sleep came in patches, and I stopped trying to rationalize what was happening. There were moments the air would grow so cold my breath would show, even on hot summer nights. Shells began to appear inside the house, arranged in patterns I didn't recognize. Circles, sometimes left on my pillow, like a gift or a warning. I had put it off for days, but eventually, I had to explore the attic. The sounds I kept hearing at night, the soft shuffling steps, the creaks directly above my head, the strange low humming that sometimes drifted down into the hallway, they all seemed to come from that part of the house. I waited until early afternoon, when the sun was high and bright and the shadows weren't quite so long. Even then, Climbing those narrow attic stairs felt like stepping into another world. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with dust. And something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood or rusted iron. The door at the top stuck slightly, swollen from years of humidity. I had to push hard to get it open, and when I did, the attic revealed itself slowly, like it didn't want me there. Sunlight filtered in through a small round window, illuminating floating dust particles that danced in the still air. The space was packed with old furniture covered in moth-eaten sheets, stacks of newspapers tied with brittle string, and boxes sealed with yellowed tape. In one corner sat a large trunk, heavy and out of place, almost like it had been dragged there recently. Unlike everything else, it wasn't covered. The brass latch on the front was tarnished but intact, and the lid had faint scratch marks on the top, as if someone or something had tried to claw it open from the inside. I hesitated before touching it, a deep instinct warning me not to. But curiosity is a powerful thing. I knelt down and flipped the latch open with some effort. The hinges creaked as I lifted the lid, and the smell hit me first hold. Paper, mildew, something sour and aged. Inside, there were photographs. Dozens. Of them, most were black and white, yellowing at the edges, showing people I didn't recognize. A man standing on the porch with a cigarette in his mouth. A woman holding a child in front of the house. Several pictures of the shoreline with the house barely visible in the background. In almost all of them, there was something off. The faces were either obscured, scratched out, or blurred. In one photo, a little girl stood on the porch with her back to the camera. Her head turned slightly, as if she had heard something behind her. What struck me most was a particular photo buried beneath the rest. It was the same girl, this time facing forward. Her eyes had been darkened out with heavy ink strokes, her mouth a thin, unnatural line. On the back, in faded cursive, were the words, "She never left." I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself it was just a strange old photo, a trick of bad lighting and smudged ink. But my fingers trembled as I held it. I knew, without knowing how, that this girl had once lived in the house, or had died there. There were more things in the trunk. A small stuffed bear, one eye missing. A cracked ceramic doll with hair so tangled it looked like seaweed. A music box that no longer worked. And a journal, leather-bound and nearly falling apart. I opened it carefully. Most of the pages were illegible, ink smeared by water or time, but a few entries remained readable. One entry stood out, dated over 50 years ago. It mentioned dreams of the ocean, whispering names at night, voices coming from the walls, and the feeling of being watched constantly. The handwriting changed abruptly mid-page, becoming erratic and shaky. The final line read, "She's here, watching me through the cracks." I closed the journal and stepped back, heart pounding. The attic felt darker suddenly, like the shadows had deepened in the corners. I could feel something behind me, though I didn't dare turn around. The air turned frigid, and from somewhere deeper in the attic came the faint sound of the music box, playing a distorted, broken lullaby I was certain it hadn't played moments before. I didn't tell Jake everything over the phone. I was afraid he wouldn't come if I did. So I only said that the place felt off, that I could use some company for the weekend. Maybe a second pair of eyes on a few strange things happening around the house. He laughed at first, said I was finally cracking under the pressure of being alone for too long, but agreed to drive down. When he arrived Friday afternoon, the sun was out and the beach looked deceptively calm, almost peaceful. He brought beer, snacks, and his usual loud energy, cracking jokes about ghost stories and asking if we'd need to perform an exorcism before dinner. I smiled, but deep down I was just relieved not to be alone anymore. That first night, Jake didn't notice anything unusual. He shrugged off the flickering lights and blamed the old wiring. The humming sound from the attic made him pause, but when we checked, the space was empty and still. He even laughed when I showed him the photo of the little girl with the darkened eyes, calling it a creepy thrift store reject. I didn't argue. I didn't want to push him away with too much, too fast. But by the second night, everything changed. We were sitting on the porch around midnight, sipping beers and listening to the waves. The moon was full, casting silver light over the sand. The conversation had slowed. That's when we both noticed her. A figure standing at the edge of the shore, half obscured by the shadow of the dunes. She was wearing something white, a dress, or maybe a gown, long and thin. Her hair hung in damp strands, black against her pale skin. She didn't move, didn't sway with the breeze. She just stood there, staring straight at the house. I whispered Jake's name, but he was already standing, squinting toward the beach. He called out twice. No response. He stepped off the porch, saying maybe someone needed help. Maybe a drunk local got lost. But as soon as his foot touched the sand, every light in the house went out at once. Total blackout. Not just inside the house, the porch light, the landscape, lights along the fence. Even the distant glow from neighboring homes disappeared like someone had snuffed out the stars. We were plunged into darkness. Jake froze. I turned toward the beach and she was gone. One moment there, the next nothing. Just the wind and the waves and the overwhelming silence pressing down from all sides. We rushed back inside using the flashlight on his phone. I locked the doors, even though I knew locks wouldn't matter. The house felt wrong. Heavy, like we had let something in. Every picture in the living room had been turned to face the wall. The small wooden cross that hung by the kitchen door was on the floor, split in two. Jake didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at the hallway, his beer forgotten on the counter. I asked him what he saw out there. He hesitated, then said he wasn't sure. That the figure didn't seem entirely there, like it shimmered in and out, like a reflection on water that doesn't belong. We checked the doors again. Everything was still locked. We walked upstairs, together, too afraid to be alone. In the guest room, the bed Jake had made earlier was now unmade, blankets pulled back, pillows on the floor. The window was wide open, though we had closed it before dinner. Sand had blown in across the floor, forming a rough trail that led to the closet door. Jake reached out to open it, but stopped when he heard a small sound from inside, a faint giggle, soft and breathy, like a child hiding during a game of hide and seek. I made up my mind the next morning. I was going to sell the house. I didn't care how beautiful the ocean view was, or how peaceful the surroundings seemed in the light of day. The sense of dread never left, not even with Jake around. He had barely spoken since the night before, his usual humor gone. He kept looking over his shoulder, flinching at small sounds. He left before noon, promising to call when he got home, but he never did. I called several times. No answer. His voicemail didn't sound like him. His voice was distant, almost hollow, like it had been recorded underwater. That same day, I contacted a local realtor and scheduled an evaluation. I didn't tell her what had happened, only that I had inherited the property and was ready to move on. She agreed to meet the following week. I spent the days in between trying to ignore the strange occurrences. I stopped going into the attic. I kept every door in the house open except the one to the guest room. I swept the floors twice a day, but somehow footprints kept appearing, wet, sandy, small. I stopped wiping them up. When the realtor came, she seemed cheerful enough. She walked through the house with a clipboard and a warm smile, complimenting the location, the architecture, the original fixtures. But the moment we stepped into the hallway upstairs, her expression changed. She paused, listening. She asked if I had someone else living with me. I said no. Her eyes darted to the closed guest room door. She didn't say anything after that. She finished the tour quickly and promised to be in touch. That night, I heard a knock on the bedroom wall again this time from the hallway side, slower than before. 2 days later, the realtor cancelled the listing. No explanation, just a brief message saying she was unable to represent the property at this time. I reached out to another agent. The same thing happened. The third one didn't even step inside. He stood on the porch for less than 2 minutes, looked over my shoulder, turned pale, and said he had to leave. He didn't come back. I tried listing it online myself, but my posts kept disappearing. I uploaded photos, wrote descriptions, added contact info, but within hours, the listings vanished. The platform said they had no record of any submissions. I started to wonder if the house was refusing to be sold, if it had somehow anchored itself to me. I searched for any historical records, digging through the journals I'd found in the ATTIC. I visited the local library, scanned old newspapers, asked around town. Most people wouldn't talk. A few would only speak in whispers. One old woman, the librarian, finally told me that a child had gone missing from the house decades ago, a little girl, daughter of the original owners. They found her shoes at the shoreline. Her body was never recovered. Her mother claimed she still heard her playing in the attic long after the search ended. I kept trying to leave. I packed my things several times, even made it to the car once, but I couldn't start the engine. It was like something gripped my chest every time I tried to go, squeezing tighter the farther I got from the porch. One night, I stayed at a motel 30 miles away, trying to escape whatever had taken root in that house. But I woke up at 3 a.m. with seawater in my hair, sand on my sheets, and the faint sound of a lullaby playing from somewhere just outside the window. I looked out, and in the parking lot, standing under a broken street lamp, was the girl in white. She was staring at my room. She raised one hand and slowly pointed back toward the coast. At some point, I stopped fighting it. It wasn't a sudden decision. It was more like erosion, little pieces of resistance worn away over time until all that remained was a quiet surrender. I didn't try to leave anymore. I no longer looked for realtors, stopped calling friends, and avoided looking at the attic door when I passed beneath it. The more I resisted, the louder the house had become. Now, with acceptance, came a strange sort of quiet. The knocking faded. The footsteps were less frequent. The air, though still heavy, no longer carried that electric dread. I lived as a guest in my own home, careful not to disturb anything I didn't understand. I kept the house clean. I opened the windows in the morning to let the sea air drift in, lit candles in the evening even when I didn't need them. I stopped sleeping in the upstairs bedrooms. I set up a cot in the small sunroom off the kitchen, where the presence felt weakest. The guest room remained locked. I never entered again after Jake's visit. Sometimes I'd find it open in the mornings, the door cracked, the faint scent of sea salt seeping out like a warning or a reminder. I'd close it without looking inside. The shells kept appearing, always in strange, deliberate patterns, spirals, triangles, concentric circles, sometimes placed at my bedside, other times on the porch steps. I began collecting them, arranging them gently on a shelf near the front door. I didn't know why. I did it. It just felt right, like honoring something that had been here long before me. I left a single shell outside each morning, as if offering it to whatever still lingered in the walls. The sea seemed to accept it. The waves never came. Too close, even during storms. As though the house and the ocean had struck a silent agreement long ago. Some nights I heard the music box again. It no longer frightened me. The lullaby echoed softly from the attic, muffled, sometimes mixed with what sounded like a child's voice humming along. I didn't try to stop it. I simply listened, quietly, and eventually fell asleep. The dreams that came weren't always unpleasant. Sometimes I'd see the girl walking along the shoreline at dusk, barefoot, holding something in her hands I couldn't quite make out. She never spoke, but she'd look back at me and smile sad, wistful, as if trying to remember who she once was. I began writing everything down. Journals filled with entries about the house, the patterns of cold, the odd silences, the things I heard and saw but never fully understood. I didn't expect anyone to read them. I just needed to keep a record. I started noticing subtle changes in the house's mood, shifts in temperature depending on which direction I walked. Feelings of grief that lingered in the hallway some days, and moments of eerie calm as though someone were watching me with approval rather than malice. The neighbors still avoided me. They stopped waving. Some even crossed the street when they saw me in town. I didn't take offense. I understood now. The house had history, layers of memory soaked into the walls, and I had become part of it. I found old portraits buried beneath the floorboards, hidden behind loose panels. Faces I didn't recognize, though a few of them bore a strange resemblance. To me, I stopped questioning how or why. I hung one of the portraits in the hallway. It seemed to make the air lighter. Storms came and went, yet the house always stood firm. Wind battered the windows, rain pounded the roof, but inside there was stillness, a kind of protection, as though something unseen was wrapping itself around. The foundation. On particularly windy nights, I'd light a candle and sit in the sunroom, listening to the sea and watching the shadows move just outside the glass, soft outlines dancing at the edge of my vision.